Good morning, America. How are you? Monday morning rail. Hi, I'm Denny Jelsma, and I'm at the world famous Jacksonville Terminal Railroad Museum, where running trains is an absolute pleasure. And in just a moment, we're going to start our Monday morning show and tell. But first of all, I'd like to say thank you to all of the people that stopped at the Amherst train show 2 weeks ago, and then this past weekend at the Jacksonville, Florida train show. We was just once again inundated with people wanting to talk to us and take pictures with us, and we just say thank you. We really appreciate you watching week after week. We get a kick out of it. People will come up and say, hey, what's neat this week, or hey, Monday morning rail. And so we really appreciate the following. And show and tell is brought to you every week by Jelsma Graphics, the people that make all the railroad embroidered clothing. So go to jelsma.com, Jelsma, for all your embroidered railroad clothing. And show and tell will start right now. Show and tell starts right now. It's Monday morning at the world famous Jacksonville Terminal Railroad Museum, and every Monday morning we do show and tell. And really today we've had an exciting show and tell. Our cameraman that's running the camera right now, he bought a brand new Pennsylvania GG1, and he was showing us and he was running it. And it's just an exciting time on Monday when the different members bring in the different stuff that they would acquire, and they like to show it off. But this morning's show and tell is about a train that a lot of people maybe in the Southeast didn't hear of, but in the Midwest was a very popular train. And it was the Great Northern Winnipeg Limited, and it went from St. Paul, Minneapolis to Winnipeg, Manitoba. Winnipeg is a very thriving city in Canada, in the province of Manitoba. It's kind of the gateway to the West, if you want to say, flatlands and wheat, and it's become quite an industrial city in the past 100 years. But the Great Northern ran a train from St. Paul, Minneapolis to Winnipeg, and it was a daily train, and it ran at night, and it left at 7:55 and got in at 7:50, or just right at 12 hours. Their biggest competitor on this route was the Sioux. The Sioux left at 7:50 out of St. Paul and Minneapolis, and got in 12 hours later. The Sioux's train was really a very nice train, but it was all heavyweight. And in 1947, when the Empire Builder was introduced to the lightweight cars, the Winnipeg Limited became so popular that they had to run two sections of the train. And when we mean a section, is that the train sold out, and then 15 minutes later, sometimes 30, depending upon the railroad, on the heavy traveled Union Pacific, they ran them 10 minutes apart. But the Great Northern ran it about 15 minutes after the first section, and the second section was typically a few cars less. But anyhow, what I have here is a model of the 1949-1950 Winnipeg Limited second section. The second section sometimes would have one E7. The first section always had two, and it was about 12 to 13 cars long. But it always had a RPO, it had a baggage, depending upon the time of the year. During the holidays, they would add a second baggage car. They had a lounge. No, this left at night, so you could get something to eat, but for a limited time. And then they had typically 2 to 3 coaches, and then they had typically they had 4 to 6 sleeping cars, and this was sold as a sleeping car train. Now, the Canadian National would bring cars or through cars that they would sell from Vancouver to Winnipeg and then to Minneapolis, St. Paul, and then they would turn them and head them back. And so this was a very, very popular train for the businessmen, because they would go to Winnipeg or to Calgary or to Vancouver. And so in the summertime, the Winnipeg Limited for the Great Northern was very popular, because they would advertise and sell it as a train to go to Vancouver and to the Rockies. And so the Winnipeg Limited ran all the way up until about 1970, when it was discontinued. The second section was dropped about 10 years earlier than that, but once again, it was so popular they had to have 2 trains going each way, and most of these sets were hand-me-down cars from the Empire Builder and then the Western Star. And typically what the railroads would do is their number 1 train nationally would get the very best car, and that was for the Great Northern, was the Empire Builder. And then they would, the next generation of car, they would hand down to their secondary train, which was the Western Star. And then when the Western Star got new equipment, they would hand it down to, let's say, the Winnipeg Limited or the International, or even on the Gopher would get some of these cars. But it was still a very first-class train, very patronized, and just a very, very interesting train, and I like it. And once again, if you were a businessman and you needed to go to Winnipeg or Calgary or Vancouver, you would hop on the Great Northern or the Sioux, and you could argue who had the better train. Nationally, if you were a Sioux fan, the Sioux would be better, or if you're a Great Northern, nationally the Great Northern. A lot of people will ask me, say, hey, how do you know so much about passenger trains? Well, number 1, I have a passion for passenger trains, and I just love reading about it. I'm 70, almost 79 years old, and so I lived through a lot of these passenger trains, but I read books like this here, and it's called The Railroad Guide, and this one here is July 1974, and it tells you all the schedules, and the ticket agent would have these at the counter, and this is how he plotted, because he didn't have a computer, and so he used this book. And so I read these books, and you could go to a train show and you'll find these, and typically they'll go from $10 to $20. The older, the more expensive, they are. But I hope that answers some of the questions that how do you know so much about trains. Is number 1, you read the rail guide. And so it's always a pleasure talking about the history of these trains, and we can keep the memory alive. Now, with all that being said, show and tell is going to end with this happy note, is that we're at the world famous Jacksonville Terminal Railroad Museum in beautiful Jacksonville, Florida, where the sun always shines and running trains is an absolute pleasure in peace and harmony and in climate controlled atmosphere. That's it.